Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Martine, and if you are new here, I do videos on Vedic astrology mainly, but also with some tropical insights, and I focus on both relationship and natal astrology. And if you like this video and you would like to hear more content from me, please like, subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. Please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you. And also, once again, as a reminder, I also do tarot readings, and if you're interested in finding out more about them, I can send you feedbacks and sample readings that I have done so far through a separate platform. Of course, they're going to be anonymous. And if you're interested in finding out more about them, what they look like, pricing, etc., you can also email me at the email in the video description. Okay, thank you. So today's topic is going to be in continuation, well, rather as a completion to a video that I have posted quite some time ago. It's been definitely, I think, over a year. Namely, it started out, the idea started out on age gap in relationships. And I wanted to complete the picture of what I painted in that particular video with newly acquired information that I have gathered since and new observations. That video that I posted, I'm going to link it in the video description. I still stand by it. I gave a point system there to calculate the likelihood that you're going to end up with a younger versus an older spouse, looking at Mercury and Saturn in your chart. I gave full details there, and I still stand by that system. Largely, it's still useful. However, there are a lot of things that I want to add. And also, if you are going to be watching that video, I do want to apologize in advance because I experienced some technical issues while I was recording it. I have noticed only after I recorded the whole thing that the recording was breaking down at parts. However, you can still understand what I am saying, and I'm going to keep that video up because since I posted it, I've seen a lot of videos coming up on the topic of age gap in relationships, and when I posted that video, nobody was talking about it. There were bits and pieces of videos and stuff and articles online on how to see if you're going to have a younger spouse and an older spouse, but I hadn't seen it discussed as a separate topic the way that I presented it. Okay, so I'm pretty much going to keep that video up forever. But yeah, just wanted to give some details. So the things that I want to talk about, I'm going to, let this video develop naturally, and I'm also going to use some examples at the end. First of all, the main topic I want to discuss is the topic of older or younger spouse or romantic partner. Once again, looking at Mercury and Saturn and what new pieces of information I can add. So, first of all, what I have noticed is that if a person has predominantly Saturn aspects, okay, so first of all, if you have, how are you going to see that you're going to be attracted to older partners? Is if you are, first of all, regardless of gender, if you have Saturn in the 5th house, most likely it's going to show that you are going to be attracted to mature individuals, mature romantic partners. And once again, the 5th house shows what you are attracted to. The 5th house shows romance, romantic relationships, etc. So the 5th house does not really show long-term relationships. It does not show marriage, okay? That is the 7th house. And like I also mentioned, I'm going to link all the related videos in the description. I also did a separate video where I talked about what you like or what you want versus what you're going to get in relationships. And I discussed this topic there, that actually if you see significant differences in archetypes between a person's 5th house and a person's 7th house, most likely it explains sometimes frustrations in relationships because they tend to be attracted to one archetype, but they are meant to marry a totally different archetype. And a very obvious example of this is if you have really opposing archetypes, meaning planets that rule opposite signs, like, well, not just opposite signs, but things that are totally opposite in nature. So a classical example would be Mercury and Saturn. Why? Because Mercury is the young person, right? Mercury shows youthfulness, it shows versatility, all that stuff. It rules the age of somewhere between or late childhood, early teens. And of course, this doesn't necessarily mean that a person is going to be attracted to very young people. That's not what I'm trying to say. But generally, their archetype is going to be a person who's very youthful and playful and versatile and eternally curious and always learning new things, etc., etc. Versus Saturn, which is, it shows the older person. It shows a person who has a lot of maturity, a lot of wisdom, is very organized, is very serious, but not so much fun and games. So if you see, for instance, a person who has Mercury in the 5th house, but Saturn in the 7th house, most likely you're going to see this person being attracted to mercurial archetypes, which are youthful and, playful, oftentimes even physically younger than the native. However, they will not manage to make relationships work if they stick with this archetype, because if it's only connected to the 5th house, unless Mercury also rules the 7th house, in which case it may last. But basically, if it's only stuck on the 5th house level, if Mercury only touches the 5th house, it only shows that the person has the ability to have a romantic relationship with this archetype, but doesn't really progress to the level of an official marriage. And obviously, for people who really want an official marriage and want a really long-term partner, it can be quite depressing to be in these situations, okay? So yes, the 5th house shows what you are attracted to in terms of romance, okay? It also shows a bunch of other things like your early childhood, your education. It shows your teaching ability, how you feel about children, etc. The Dasamsha, sorry, not the Dasamsha, the Saptamsha. The Saptamsha is basically connected to the 5th house. It's the same level as the 5th house, meaning except it's more detailed, okay? The Saptamsha, the D7 divisional chart, the 7th divisional chart, is the chart that shows what kind of a person you are going to be attracted to. And once again, if you look at the Saptamsha or the D7 divisional chart, and you see a lot of Mercury energy, maybe Mercury is in the ascendant, or Mercury is conjunct the ruler of the ascendant, or looking at the ascendant. Mercury, let's say there's a lot of Mercury energy, most likely this person is going to be attracted to youthful partners, okay? And once again, whether they are meant to marry a person like this or not is most likely going to be shown in the Navamsha or the 7th house, okay? The 7th house is the house of marriage, long-term partnerships, basically serious relationships, okay? And the equivalent of the 7th house in the natal chart, this doesn't mean that it's calculated based on the 7th house, but it is the equivalent on a larger scale, on a more detailed scale. That is the Navamsha chart or the D9 divisional chart, okay? So, and once again, to see the kind of person you are meant to actually be in long-term relationships with or get married to, you have to look at the Navamsha, okay? And whatever is promised there most likely will end up being your partner. Or on a simple level, just look at the D1 or the natal chart and look at the 7th house and whatever is sitting there. This is like a short introduction for you to understand if you don't want to watch the video that I made on what you want versus what you get in relationships, okay? Yeah, so basically what I have noticed and what I can add, okay, versus the first video that I made, is that when a person really has a lot of influence of Mercury, let's say, either Mercury or Saturn. So if you just have Mercury and there's no Saturn involved with the 7th house, most likely this person will end up with a younger partner, okay? With a person who is actually physically younger. However, what I have seen, or let me add the opposite, of course, the opposite end of the spectrum, if a person has only Saturn but no Mercury energy on the seventh house or in the Navamsha, most likely they're going to end up with an older partner, considerably older partner. And again, a person who's actually physically older. However, what I have noticed, and I didn't really mention in that video, the first one that I made, is that when people have both Mercury and Saturn, maybe they have Saturn aspecting the seventh house, but they also have Mercury in the seventh house, or they have the ruler of the seventh house conjunct Mercury, but they have Saturn in the seventh house. So you see both Mercury and Saturn in connected to the spouse archetype. And of course, this is not, I'm talking seventh house here, but you actually have to look at all the partner dispositors, which I have mentioned. I have also mentioned them in the video that I did on how to find out which nakshatras are the most relevant for your spouse archetype, but I'm going to list them in this video at some point as well. Okay, but just looking at the seventh house for now, because the seventh house and the fifth house, the interpretations for these stand regardless of gender. Okay, so the seventh house is the spouse, the fifth house is romantic partners, affairs, romance that doesn't lead to an actual official relationship, let me put it like that. Okay, so when you see both Mercury and Saturn on the seventh house, it's more difficult to determine if the person is actually going to be older or younger. And in fact, what I have seen more often than not is that sometimes the partner is a mixture of these archetypes. So for instance, you could have a partner who is maybe physically younger than you, but is very mature for his or her age, okay? Or you could have a partner who, on the other opposite of the spectrum, is older than you, but is very mercurial, okay? They're very versatile, they're very youthful, they're constantly learning new things, whatever, good at communication, etc. All the things connected to Mercury. So this is something that I've seen. Or another way that it manifests is that people will have multiple significant relationships. I would not necessarily, list this criteria of having both Mercury and Saturn aspecting the seventh as something that shows promiscuity or anything like that. So I'm not trying to say that this person is going to hop around from one relationship to another. But it does create this possibility of them having more than one very significant relationship, sometimes more than one marriage, okay, where one person, one spouse that they have could be more of the Mercury archetype and the other spouse could be more of the Saturn archetype. And I'm going to get into some examples at the end as well. But before I move on, like I mentioned, I am going to list all the things that you have to look at once again, and I'm going to add something new here by comparison to what I have already listed in that first initial video that I made. Okay, so once again, you have to look at, for the spouse archetype or for the kind of person that you're going to end up in long-term relationships with, you have to look at the seventh house, planets in the seventh house. So this is strictly on D1 chart, natal chart level, okay? You have to look at planets in the seventh house lord, meaning the ruler of the sign that is on the seventh house, and aspects to this house lord, okay? So is it aspected by Mercury or Saturn? And you also have to look at Jupiter for women. Jupiter is the spouse archetype, the husband archetype, okay? For straight women especially, okay? Once again, I mentioned if you are gay, it depends on what you identify with the most. So if you identify as more masculine, you feel more masculine, I would suggest that you go with Venus as the spouse archetype, which is the spouse archetype traditionally seen for men. Okay, if you are more feminine, then go with Jupiter, which is the spouse archetype that is more traditionally seen for women. Okay, so yes, Jupiter for women, Venus for men. This is the female archetype. Once again, if you are a gay man, and you identify more as female, you probably would be better off looking at Jupiter as the spouse archetype. Okay. But yeah, these are the spouse archetypes. Aside from this, you also have to look at the Darakaraka, which is the planet with the lowest degree. The planet with the lowest degree, regardless of sign, regardless of. So look at the list of your planets and whichever has the lowest degree. So let's say you have moon in 0.0 degrees 5 minutes Aries, and there's no other planet at 0 degrees in any other sign, then that is going to be your Darakaraka. And you have to look at this Darakaraka. This is, particular for each individual because it varies. It could be any one of the 7 planets, okay? It could be the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, or Jupiter, or Saturn. These are the potential Darakarakas. These are the potential Atmakarakas as well. So you have to look at the Darakaraka. Is the Darakaraka in a sign that is ruled by Saturn? Is it in a sign that is ruled by Mercury? Is it aspected by Saturn or Mercury? This will also potentially influence the whether you're going to be attracted to older spouses or younger spouses, okay? And the planet itself, is the planet itself Mercury, for instance, then most likely you're going to be attracted to mercurial kind of partners. So youthfulness, okay? So this is the Darakaraka. You have to look at this, and again, this varies from one person to the next, and this is the same. There is no difference between genders here, so like it's not one for women and one for men. It's always the planet with the lowest degree. That is the Darakaraka, and this is a planet that shows basically the partner archetype, the spouse archetype, the soulmate archetype, quote unquote. Okay, and the type of connection that you are seeking in relationships. And a final criteria or a final point to look at when it comes to assessing the spouse archetype is the 7th house from the Atmakarka. Now, the Atmakarka, for those who don't know, is the planet with the highest degree. So once again, you look at the natal chart, always the natal chart for the Darakaraka and the Atmakarka. And if you look at the natal chart and the planet with the highest degree, let's say you have Sun in 29 degrees Pisces, there's no other planet that goes above 29 degrees. The Sun is going to be your Atmakarka. So with the Atmakarka, you want to look at the 7th placement from itself. So for example, if the Atmakarka in your chart falls in Pisces, the 7th from Pisces is Virgo. Do you have any planets in Virgo? More specifically, do you have Saturn or Mercury in the 7th from in Virgo? Because then it will show a attraction to either older or younger spouse, depending on whether it's Saturn or Mercury, respectively. Okay, and more importantly, you want to look at the 7th from the Atmakarka, or rather the 7th from the Atmakarka in the Navamsha, the D9 divisional chart, because this actually shows the kind of person you are going to end up in a long-term relationship with. Okay. You can also look at, and this is kind of a third chapter, third category of attraction, to see romantic partners, the kind of people you are attracted to, but you may not end up marrying, okay? So people that are for romance, for passionate affairs, maybe one-night stands or stuff like that, look for the 5th house, regardless of gender. Look at maybe the 5th house lord, especially you want to look once again, you want to look at the 5th house in the D1, in the natal chart. Are there planets in the 5th house, okay? Where is the ruler of the 5th house? So for instance, if 5th house is sitting in Aries, where is Mars? Is Mars aspected by Mercury, right? Because Mars rules Aries, okay? So you want to see what the ruler of the 5th house is doing. Is it connected to Mercury or Saturn? And that will show whether you are attracted more to older or younger partners, okay? So the 5th house, irrespective of gender. And now for women, for men, there is no separate girlfriend archetype, quote unquote. But for women, you also want to look at Mars, because Mars is like, again, I will mention this as I mentioned in previous videos, that Mars is basically the boyfriend archetype, quote unquote. So Mars will show the kind of man that women are attracted to, especially physically. Okay, especially. So Mars is more like passionate affairs, but this is like not husband material. Mars is not the father kind of person. That's the main reason why this is not the husband archetype, because Mars is the warrior, fighter, bad boy, whatever, likes adventure, that kind of thing. So Mars is not a family person. Okay. This is the way that it was reasoned by some of the sages as well. Like Jupiter is the husband archetype, because Jupiter is about raising kids, and it's about wisdom, imparting wisdom, and all that stuff. Okay. Yeah, but if you want to understand why you are attracted to a certain type, maybe if you're a woman, you want to look at Mars. You want to see what Mars is doing, where it's placed, which sign, nakshatra, aspects, even house. Okay, house will show most likely where you tend to meet your boyfriends. Okay, so yeah, you want to look at that as well. And on top of this, you also want to look at the Saptamsha, the D7 divisional chart. Are there any planets in the Saptamsha, in the ascendant? And again, especially planets that are in the ascendant, or somehow connected to the ruler of the ascendant, the lord of the ascendant. And again, this will show the kind of partner that you are attracted to, but may not necessarily be the kind of partner that is fit to have a long-term relationship with you. Okay, unless this archetype is also repeating itself in the Navamsha, in the D9 divisional chart. And then the final point that I want to add, the thing that you want to look at for a romantic relationships that may not necessarily lead to marriage, you want to look at the seventh from the Atmakaraka in the D7, in the Saptamsha. Okay. Once again, the same thing. If your Atmakaraka is Sun, let's say, look at which planet is opposite the Sun. Which planet is, like, if the Sun is in whatever, Taurus, let's say, you want to look at planets in Scorpio. Are there any planets there? And that's going to give you some hint with respect to the kind of partner that you are attracted to. And once again, if this is Mercury, most likely you're going to be attracted to a youthful partner. If this is Saturn, you're going to be attracted to an older partner. Okay, so this is the general theory with respect to age gap. However, I finally want to add a new, well, maybe not so new. I guess I should have seen it. Well, I have seen it for a while now, but I have postponing making this video. The thing that you also want to look at is Rahu. Okay, and what I have realized, and this is the part that I did not mention at all in the original video that I made on younger or older spouse or age gap in relationships, but basically Rahu does not necessarily point to either a younger or an older spouse, unlike Mercury and Saturn, which clearly show a attraction to one type or the other. Namely, Mercury shows younger, youthful energy, and Saturn shows maturity, older energy. But when you have Rahu, for instance, connected to the seventh house, the Navamsha, the seventh in the Navamsha, connected to any of the partner archetype, the spouse archetype, this can show you attracting partners that are very unconventional. So, and I have talked about Rahu in the foreign spouse video that I made. So definitely, undisputably, Rahu is the strongest indicator of potentially having a foreign spouse, one of the strongest single indicators. There are also connections between houses to be looked at, but Rahu definitely shows foreign people. Okay, but Rahu shows anything strange, okay, anything unconventional, unorthodox, people, the kind of relationships that people will frown upon, or at the very least will raise eyebrows. So because of this, I have seen it now that I have done a lot more readings, and I've also looked at celebrity charts out of curiosity. I have noticed that actually when it's a big age gap, it's actually more likely to involve Rahu than, for instance, Mercury or Saturn. So Mercury, again, shows an attraction to youthful partners. Saturn can show an attraction to older partners, but these kinds of relationships where the age gap is like 30 plus years, for instance, or whatever it doesn't even matter. I can't give you a number exactly at which age is the cutoff for how weird you can get, because it depends on the society that you function in. Okay. And I'm gonna get into some examples at the end, okay? But basically, Rahu in the seventh house, Rahu connected to, like I mentioned, all the previous dispositors. So, Rahu conjunct Jupiter, for instance, can show an attraction to much older or much younger partners in a woman's chart, okay? um yeah, basically any kind of big age gap, especially since, for instance, in the West, what I have noticed is that people don't really raise eyebrows to age gap relationships when the man is considerably older than the woman. So you're more likely to see Rahu involved with the spouse archetype of people where they're in relationships where the partner, the man, is younger than the woman. And I'm going to talk about, for instance, Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore a little bit at the end. For instance, out of curiosity, I did some research on this, and I came across this woman. Maybe you heard about her. I think her name is Stodden something, Courtney. I think Courtney Stodden. Is it Courtney or Claire? Whatever. It's something Stodden, whatever. She apparently was a subject of huge controversy a few years ago, maybe a decade ago or something like that, because she was dating this famous actor who was, I think, 30 something years older than she was. And not only was he much older, but she was a minor when they started the relationship. So clearly it was this hugely controversial kind of partnership. And I think not just relationship, but they got married. And if I search her chart, and she has Jupiter conjunct Rahu, okay, which makes sense. Clearly, the conjunction is the strongest aspect. Or if Rahu is in the seventh house, especially seventh in the Navamsha, or it could be seventh from the Atmakarka, especially in the Navamsha. Most likely, you're going to end up with a spouse that is going to, raise some eyebrows. People are going to either, again, this does not necessarily show an age gap. Not necessarily. Rahu shows anything that is unconventional, okay? So it could be a different culture, a person of a different religion, a different race. It could be, especially in some cultures, like for instance, some of the clients that I've had, I told them, well, you have Rahu in the seventh from the Atmakarka, most likely you're going to marry a divorcee, and they were not happy about it, because in some parts of the world, marrying a divorcee or divorcee, whatever you call them, it's a very controversial thing. It's a very taboo thing, especially for a man, you know? So that, for instance, also is shown by Rahu. Marrying a widower or a widow is also shown by Rahu. Or marrying a person who has some kind of unusual appearance. Like, for instance, I've seen this in the chart of a person who had a crush on a person who had one eye, one eye of a color and one eye of a different color. That's, for instance, Rahu, okay? Especially if it's connected to the seventh house, it can even seep into the area of the spouse's physical appearance. Yeah. So basically, yes, anything unconventional is shown by Rahu, but it can even show, like I mentioned in the beginning, it can show up even in these situations where the age of one partner or the age gap between partners is the main reason why society is somehow frowning upon this relationship, okay? And yeah, I'm going to get into some examples, but of course, Rahu just shows controversy, okay? Whatever it touches, it can bring some level of controversy. And another thing, before I get into the examples, is that it does not necessarily mean that having Rahu connected to the seventh or in the Navamsha, again to the seventh house, it does not necessarily mean that every relationship you have is going to be extremely unconventional and is going to have people talking. But most likely, at some point in your life, you will experience something like this, okay? So you're going to have some kind of a relationship that is going to raise eyebrows or is going to be seen as unorthodox. and people are gonna have opinions about it, stuff like that. Another thing before I get into the examples is in the Navamsha, I should have mentioned this as well. You also want to look at the seventh house in the Navamsha. Okay, so does Rahu sit in the seventh house in the Navamsha? Does Rahu aspect the seventh house in the Navamsha? This also reinforces the idea that you're going to have a spouse that is somehow very different from you, very unconventional, potentially a foreigner, and or potentially could even show a huge age gap, considerable age gap. Okay. Yeah, in the Saptamsha, not so much the seventh house, more, I would say more the ascendant and the ascendant lord. Okay, but of course any planet that sits in the seventh house is also gonna aspect the ascendant, so planets in the seventh house as well, but to a lesser degree. Okay, so getting into the examples, let me see, I have picked a few of them. So Ashton Kutcher. And I found it particularly interesting with Ashton Kutcher because, again, I think he married, right? He was married to Demi Moore. Demi Moore is not even so much older. She's only 15 years older than he is. Clearly, if the genders had been reversed here, nobody would give a fluff about the age gap. But because he happened to be the man and he was 15 years younger than the wife, that raised some eyebrows. And what you see in his chart, the first thing that catches your eye is, because once again, if you look at Saturn, Saturn is in the fourth house. So just briefly for people who don't know how to read the chart, maybe you're going to see the number of the house in the inner circle, close to the inner circle. And you're going to see the planets on the left in that table, and the symbols and the symbols or the glyphs of the planet are also written there, so you can tell which planet is which symbol. And the true node is basically the north node or Rahu. Okay, so the first thing that I can notice, right, Saturn does not aspect the seventh house. First of all, the seventh house is empty. Seventh house is in Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars and Ketu. Ketu falls in Pisces. There's no planet there. Mars is in Cancer. And it's aspected by Mercury. It's opposite Mercury, if you can see. Okay? So, if anything, it shows that the spouse archetype is meant to be a mercurial rather than, well, to be fair, it's aspected by a lot of planets: Mercury, Sun, Moon, and Venus. Okay? So, this just shows person who is creative, feminine, artistic, beautiful, but also youthful because Mercury is there. Okay, so most likely the spouse is going to be younger. But what happened in his case, I think, Saturn, before I get into it, Saturn does not aspect the seventh house. It does not aspect the fifth house. Saturn is in the fourth. Okay. However, he has Rahu in the fifth house. To be fair, I have not looked at his Navamsha, but just looking at his D1 chart, I'm guessing the Rahu was the main reason why he was attracted to Demi Moore. Okay, because the fifth house shows what you are attracted to, and Rahu is anything unconventional, basically. Controversial, unconventional, likely to raise eyebrows. Let's see, his Darakaraka is also Mars, okay? Right, and now eventually he married, what's her name? Mila something. Who is younger than he is, okay? And which actually matches his seventh house. So the relationship that he had with Demi Moore did not last, but now he's married to Mila Kunis, right? That's her name. And she matches his spouse archetype a lot better because the seventh house is ruled by Mars. Mars is aspected by Mercury, okay? And Mars is also the Darakaraka, the planet with the lowest degree. The planet, the Atmakaraka in his case is Venus. Yeah, doesn't really tell you much, okay? It just shows the person, it shows the partner archetype opposite. So opposite the Atmakaraka, you have Mars again. So Mars or Venus, neither of these point towards either younger or an older spouse, okay? We're talking strictly about age for now. Yeah, so pretty much this is what I noticed in his chart. And now looking at Demi Moore's chart. The 5th house is empty. The ruler of the 5th house is Mercury conjunct Sun and Venus. So attracted to younger partners. Attracted to younger partners who are also good looking and very creative and artistic, right? The Sun rules dramatic arts. So, yes, pretty much that's her type. And also, the Sun rules the 7th house. So she has one of those love marriage yogas. The 5th and the 7th house lords are conjunct, and they're conjunct Venus. Okay. And so it's interesting because her first husband, Bruce Willis, was older than she was. Let me see. The Sun, right, not aspected by Saturn. Let me see. Actually, yes. Wait. So, in her case, Saturn is aspecting this conjunction. Saturn is aspecting the conjunction of Mercury, Sun, and Venus, okay? By 10th aspect. So she has a combination here of both Saturn and Mercury, basically, around the kind of men that she is attracted to. Both the kind of partner that she would be attracted to for romantic, passionate affairs, and also for long-term, stable relationships. And she also has Mars conjunct Rahu. As a woman, as a straight woman, Mars shows the kind of partner she finds attractive. Rahu is controversy, someone who is very unusual, unconventional, an unconventional dating choice. Very likely explains the attraction she felt towards Ashton Kutcher. But aside from that, getting back to her 7th and 5th house lords aspected, influenced by both Mercury and Saturn. So here in this case is, like I said in the beginning, so she had her first husband, I think, was like 6-7 years older than she was. Then Ashton Kutcher was 15 years younger than she was. So she had 2 major relationships. She probably had more than that. I don't know exactly. I haven't studied her entire dating history. But the 2 more publicized major relationships, one of them was more of a Saturn. So one partner was older, the other one was younger. Okay. So all of the archetypes are represented in her chart, just looking at her natal chart. Okay, let's see if she has, let me see, which is the Atmakarka. The Atmakarka is the Sun. Sun, 7th from the Sun is the Moon. The Moon doesn't say younger or, actually, according to some sources that I've read, but I don't know if this is 100% true, the Moon could actually also show an interest towards younger partners. Or at least good-looking partners, okay? Yeah, so she has the Moon in the 7th from the Atmakaraka. And the Darakaraka is Jupiter, right? Yes, Jupiter. Yeah, Jupiter, yeah, not influenced by either Mercury or Saturn. Yeah. In any case, yes, her chart does explain her, what can I say, taste in partners, or the kind of partners she ended up with. Okay, so moving on to the next example. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor, I'm not going to talk about her in terms of age of the partners she attracted, because I know she dated all kinds of partners. She married them. But I wanted to talk a little bit about her chart because very simply you can immediately see some major themes of her relationship, of her love life, let me put it like that. So ascendant in Scorpio, 7th house falls in Taurus, ruler of the 7th house, Venus, again in the 5th house. So another love marriage yoga. which, well, I don't think she was probably ever going to be forced by her parents to marry someone that the parents chose, maybe, or maybe, I don't know. But she definitely, first of all, married guys that she really wanted to marry, that she fell in love with, blah, blah, blah. So love marriage yoga means that you have a romantic relationship that develops naturally into a marriage. Okay, so she has Venus there, conjunct Rahu. It's a wide conjunction, but it still counts. Okay, so what this shows in her case, I think, first and foremost, huge controversies surrounding the married life. So in her case, I don't even know exactly. I haven't analyzed how old or young the spouse. I think she's dated both younger and older partners. But there was a lot of controversy connected to her married life. The very fact that she had, I think, 6 or 7 husbands, or she married the same guy twice. I think she had 6 husbands, right? She married Richard Burton twice. And that in itself was controversial. Then there was the fact that she married the best friend of her deceased husband not too long after her husband died, and then cheated on the friend of her deceased husband with Richard Burton, and was criticized by even the Pope at the time and called, I don't know, they were like publicly shamed or something like that for adultery, because she was not divorced and she was parading herself in public with Richard Burton. So a lot of controversy, which would definitely be explained by the presence of Rahu there. On top of which, Venus conjunct Rahu in the 5th house is one of the best combinations for fame and glamour. And Venus also happens to be, I think, yes, her Atmakaraka. So her ultimate goal in life is Venus. Pleasure, fun, beauty, glamour, arts, and then connected to Rahu, massive fame in the 5th house, which is the house of dramatic arts. Okay, explains a lot. Okay, 7th from the Atmakarka, which is Virgo. There are no planets there, so it doesn't necessarily show anything. Let's see, the Dharkarka is Mars, right? No, it's Saturn. Saturn, right? Right, the dark eye is Saturn, right. So there is a point that shows she's attracted to older men. And she has also dated older men. I haven't actually analyzed. I'm pretty sure that Richard Burton was older than her, and so was the husband who died, I think, that she was really attached to. But yeah, Saturn as Dharkaraka definitely shows attraction to older men. Saturn also happens to be opposite Jupiter. Okay, so even stronger attraction to older men, more mature men, let me put it like that. Yeah, in any case, I wanted to mainly focus on the Rahu influence here in her chart. Yes, another example, George Clooney. I tried to find Amal Clooney, his wife, but her time of birth is not given, and there's really, without the time of birth, the rest of her chart was not really conclusive to show anything. But what do I see in George Clooney's chart? First thing, Rahu in the 7th house by itself. Okay, already controversial marriage situation. He married a foreigner. Classical. Rahu in the 7th house, especially when not even aspected by, not conjunct other planets, definitely shows a foreign spouse. Okay? Person from a foreign land, culture, blah, blah, blah. But then on top of that, there's also, in his case, the added quote unquote controversy of the fact there is a significant age gap between them. The ruler of the 7th, let's look at his whole situation. The ruler of the 7th is Sun. Sun is conjunct Mercury. Bingo. Okay. Younger spouse. Which definitely is. I don't know what the age gap. I think it's something close to 20 years between them. Around 20 years, maybe more. I don't know. Around 20 years, I think. It's pretty considerable age difference. But yeah, pretty much. So already the Rahu is controversy, and then he also has Mercury conjunct, which shows that he will end up with a younger spouse. Very tight conjunction too. His Mercury is combust. That's what you call them when they are within 10 degrees of the sun. But let's not dwell. Okay. Let's look at his Atmakarka. His Atmakarka is Atmakarka is Mercury. Oh, okay. That's him. Interesting. His Atmakarka is Mercury and conjunct the ruler of the seventh house. Very interesting. And yes, doesn't really give extra information with respect to older or younger spouse. And let's see, the Darakaraka is the moon, right? Yes, the moon is the planet with the lowest degree. The Darakaraka is conjunct Saturn, okay, so it gets kind of interesting here. It would be interesting here to see if he actually dated older women at some point in his life. Maybe he did when he was younger. But yes, the moon conjunct Saturn shows, and Jupiter. Wow, like I just realized this. Jupiter is the planet of legislation. Both Saturn and Jupiter is the planet of, courts of law and stuff, and his wife is a lawyer. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. Yeah, but basically it shows that he likes mature women. And, well, his spouse definitely comes across as a very mature, serious woman. But she also happens to be physically younger than he is. Okay? So here you have another one of those early mentioned examples where the spouse is a mixture of the Mercury and the Saturn archetypes. Because she's younger, but she's also a Saturnian. She's like mature, disciplined, career oriented kind of person. Okay, so this is what I could say for. Oh, and the last example, I pulled out the chart of my great grandmother. And she married a husband who was 25 years her senior. And yeah, as you can see, when she was 18, actually, when she was 18, she married a guy who was 25 years her senior. It was not an arranged marriage, it was just whatever. Long story. But basically, out of curiosity, I looked at her chart, and as you can see, the seventh house is empty. There are no planets there. However, the ruler of the seventh house is conjunct Saturn, older spouse. Okay, and there's no Mercury going on here. Mercury does not aspect. Well, Mercury aspects the fifth house, so most likely she was attracted to younger spouses. Interesting. And also, Jupiter is conjunct the Sun and Mercury, youthfulness. But yes, the main signifier here is Venus conjunct Saturn. Let's look at Atmakarka is Gemini, Mars in Gemini. Wow. Atmakarka is Mars, and opposite Mars, what do we see? Rahu. Bingo. Yes, bingo. So yes, this is a person who married a person who is way older, 25 years. It was a huge age gap. Even back then, it was a significant age gap. This was like, I don't know, in the 1920s or something. Yeah, I think it was before 1920, actually. But it's a huge age gap. 20-something years is a considerable age gap. And Rahu in the seventh from the Atmakaraka definitely shows some kind of unusual spouse. And the Darakaraka is Venus. Oh, Venus, okay. So both the seventh and the Darakaraka are Venus, which just strengthens the orientation towards an older spouse because Venus is conjunct Saturn. Okay? So, yes, this has been it. Pretty much the full list of examples that I have pulled for this. So, the main things that I wanted to introduce that are new when compared to the original video that I did on age gap and older or younger spouse, the main things I wanted to mention is this thing that when the spouse archetype, the dispositors that are connected to the spouse archetype in the natal chart, in the Navamsha, and in the Saptamsha, when they are influenced by both Mercury and Saturn, you can't really 100% tell which one of them are. Well, yes, again, if you add points, like in this case as well. I mean, you have the fact that Venus is both the ruler of the seventh and the Dharaka means that two of these major partner dispositors are influenced by Saturn versus Jupiter being conjunct Mercury, only one, okay? And then on top of that, the fact that Rahu is aspecting the Atmakaraka. So if you count them, if you see more influence of, more influence of Saturn or Mercury, then more likely it is going to be either an older or a younger spouse. But as I mentioned in the examples and in the beginning, sometimes it could be the person will have one younger spouse, one older spouse, or it could be they could date a younger spouse who is mature in age or an older spouse who is I don't want to say immature, but an older spouse who is younger, youthful in attitude and in energy, and maybe they look younger for their age, okay? That's the main thing I wanted to introduce that is new. What I have noticed, and I'm going to leave this, and also, yes, what I have noticed is that when it's really just one or the other, when it's just Mercury influencing the seventh house, most likely the person will end up with a younger spouse. When it is just Saturn aspecting all of the partner dispositors, most likely they're going to end up with a younger spouse. In fact, one example that I know, one of my friends, for instance, in her chart, she has Saturn in the seventh house. There's no other planet there. The other partner dispositors do not point to either Mercury or Saturn, and her most long-lasting relationship so far is with a person who is roughly 10 years older. And in his chart, there are no planets in the seventh house. However, the lord of his seventh house is conjunct Mercury. And again, all the other partner dispositors do not point towards either Mercury or Saturn. So Mercury wins, okay? And so basically he is with a younger person, a person who's roughly 10 years younger, and she's with a person who's 10 years older. And these things are both shown in their natal charts, which is really interesting. And this is why I love astrology. And I also mentioned this in the video that I have done on the Saptamsha versus the Navamsha, and what you're going to get, what you want versus what you're going to get in relationships. It's not just Saptamsha versus Navamsha. I talked about a lot of things, I think. Another thing is that if there is an incompatibility here between your archetypes, that's a sign that most likely you're not going to end up together. So like if you're interested in a person who is 10 years younger than you, and in their chart, maybe they have only Mercury aspecting their partner archetypes, this points towards the fact that there's a big incompatibility between your archetypes, because basically if it's only Mercury on his or her partner dispositors, they're meant to marry a person who's younger than they are. And if you're 10 years older, then you cannot be the right person for them, and various combinations of the sort. So this is with respect to Mercury and Saturn. And then the most important part that I wanted to add is connected to Rahu. Okay, so when you see Rahu connected to the seventh house, either in the D1 chart or the natal chart, or in the Navamsha, most likely it's going to show a partner that is from very different. Okay, could be age, could also be that the main thing that is going to turn heads will be the age difference, but this partner just could be unconventional in a number of ways, which I have I've mentioned before. Okay, so yes, these were the main things that I wanted to add. And once again, if you have listened and if you have found it useful, please subscribe, hit the notifications bell to see when I will post a new video. And also, if you're interested in a personal consultation, I do consultations on a wide variety of topics. I also do tarot readings, so please check out the video description. I will leave my contact information there. Thank you.